Hey everyone, it's Bradford, your carnivore curmudgeon. And if you're sitting at home longing to know the answer, yes, I am a real carnivore. And no, I am not an actual curmudgeon mostly. Wanted to talk this week about some failure that I have seen in my personal life, and I've seen in some friends of mine who have tried a low carb diet only to find themselves failing either in weight loss or in overall health, or more often than not, just their overall way of feeling, their well-being, especially with gut issues. And that's when we try to recreate too many things too often to make them carnivore, ketovore, or keto, based on dishes that we loved in our past way of eating life. I have used too many ingredients in the keto diet to recreate, like almond flour, like artificial sweeteners, that just messed with my guts and did not make me feel good and did not help me in any way in my efforts. And I've seen friends do the same thing and actually just give up altogether because they thought, this is not for me. So that's something we all have to be careful of, but every once in a while, isn't it nice to find something that reminds us of another dish we used to enjoy, but we can't anymore in the traditional sense? For me, one of those dishes is jambalaya. I love jambalaya. I used to love rice-based dishes, which jambalaya is. But of course, trying to maintain a carnivore, ketovore, keto way of eating, that sort of lets that dish out. Can't have rice, not good for me. It's just an overall bad choice for people trying to maintain the integrity of this way of eating. So I thought, is there a way that I can replace the rice with something animal-based and make it similar to a traditional jambalaya? And I think I found a way to do it. Come on with me and let's see how to do it. First thing we want to do is get an oven preheated for our chicken, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And going to use some classic jambalaya chicken thighs. Now, in this particular case, we're not going to cook the meat with the rice to finish it off like you normally would, but we're going to pre-cook this chicken, and you can use this, of course, for other things. There'll probably be too much of it just for this one dish. This is not a quick and easy evening after work dish either. This is probably something you're going to want to do on your day off or on a Sunday. Each component of this jambalaya is going to take some time on its own. So next thing we're going to do is put a little bit of chicken stock in here just to keep it moist, keep it from drying out, but it's going to render off a lot of that fat, which I'll talk about in a minute. Cover it with a little aluminum foil and into the oven at 350 that we've preheated it to for about 1 hour, and it should be up to temp after an hour. And while that chicken is baking, it's time to make the rice. But before we dive into it, let me just give a quick shout out to Reed, the carnivorous chef. Check out his channel on YouTube. This is where I got the idea for this substitute for the rice part of this. It's not exactly the same as his, but it certainly was the basis. So make sure and check him out. And for this, I used 6 eggs, some red bell pepper powder, some onion powder, some celery seed, and some salt, all to mimic the trinity that goes into jambalaya: celery, onions, and bell pepper. And it's optional, but some baking powder and some garlic powder also fits. You'll also need 6 ounces of pork rinds and 1 pound of cooked ground chicken. Now, briefly, let me tell you about this ground chicken. Just fry it up in a pan, and don't be afraid to cook it until it's all the way dry. Just let it cook until when you start turning it over, there's actual noticeable brown bits of chicken because the moisture has all cooked off. You don't want this wet. And we're going to bake this rice mixture. So get a cast iron pan or whatever it is you use to bake something like cornbread. and when you used to cook cornbread, and grease it up real good in preparation for our rice. Now for measurements for this part of the dish, we're going to put in 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of the bell pepper powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of celery seeds, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. Give it a good mix because we're going to put this in with our chicken and pork rinds in a blender. Start by cracking 2 eggs into the blender. We're going to make this in layers to give ourselves a little head start. This is pretty sticky, so we're going to help ourselves all we can. Put in about 1/3 to 1/2 of the ground chicken, 1/3 to 1/2 of the pork rinds on top of those eggs, and then about 1/3 to 1/2 of your mixture of herbs and spices. And then repeat the process until everything is in the blender itself. Now, when we blend this, it's going to be real sticky, like I said, but if it gets too sticky and you just can't get it to mix and incorporate everything, go ahead and add a little bit of water or a little bit of chicken stock, and it'll come together pretty well. But you are going to have to stop this in midstream and scrape down the sides. Now take your mixed up mixture and put it in the greased up pan that you have prepared to bake this. There's no need to preheat this pan. It's going to be just fine putting it in cold altogether. And just flatten it out in whatever kind of pan you're using. The key is to make sure that it's even all the way around so that it cooks evenly. And then we're going to put it in the oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to cook it for about 40 minutes. If you have a smaller pan and you made it thicker, you may want to add 10 minutes. And remember those nice fat chicken thighs that we baked for an hour? Well, they've finished baking and they are cool enough now to handle. So I'm going to pour off all the renderings, all the chicken fat from those thighs. And that's going to be a key ingredient for our faux rice aspect of this dish. Now, take your chicken thighs, remove the skin, and remove the bones. Be sure and reserve those. Those chicken skins make a tasty treat if you cook them up in the oven or the air fryer. And the bones, of course, will make some great stock for later. Once you've got everything pulled off the bone, just set it aside. We're going to come back to it. And through the miracle of tireless editing, our faux rice mixture is done. So the next thing we're going to do is get our andouille sausage. For this dish, we're going to need about 1/2 pound and cut it up into medallions. Well, a little taste test there. And we're going to get ready to fry this up. And the chicken that we set aside, we're going to cube it up too. We're going to try to make everything warm right before we put it all together. And the last bit of this meaty delight is some shrimp. How many shrimp is really up to you. I like my jambalaya with a lot of shrimp in it. My wife can't eat shrimp, so I ended up putting this dish together separately so that she didn't have to pick the shrimp out. Our fake rice mixture is cooled off to the point that we can begin finalizing everything now. Just going to cut some pieces out. It looks like cornbread, doesn't it? It actually has a nice texture, a little like cornbread as well. You could probably eat this like cornbread if you wanted. Jambalaya and cornbread go well together, but remember, this is almost an all-meat dish, so it's pretty rich. Now we're going to take that fake rice and we're going to put big hunks of it back in our blender. And we're just going to pulse this in the blender until we get the desired consistency. And that's sort of up to you. But it should sort of resemble the same size as rice granules, rice grains, or like quinoa, if you've ever had that. I'm going to put some of that in a dish. And you can see that by not over blending it, I have approximately the same texture as a handful of rice. Now remember that chicken fat? I'm going to warm that up because it's going to make our quote-unquote rice sticky. That's about the only fat that's in this dish, except for the sausage. And speaking of sausage, while our chicken fat warms up, we're going to fry up these medallions until they're crisp on both sides. And then we're going to heat up our chicken cubes. If you want to pour a little bit of fat in there to keep it from drying out, that works nicely. And of course, last but not least, is going to be our shrimps. I cooked this shrimp in some brown butter. Regular butter is fine, or whatever you choose. I also put on just a little bit of this Creole seasoning to give it a little bit more of a jambalaya traditional flavor. Now it's time to put everything together. We've got our faux rice. We've got our chicken fat that we're going to stir into it a little at a time because we don't want this to come to the point of being a soup. We want it all to get soaked up by the chicken and the pork rind mixture with those spices, so it makes the sticky rice-like consistency and base for the jambalaya. And here comes the best part, the meats. Arby's has got nothing on us. We have got the meats. We've got chicken, we've got sausage, and we've got shrimp. And whether you stir it up or leave it on top like that, does not matter. It's all going to the same place, and it is Carnivore Jambalaya. Okay, here comes the official taste test. I haven't tried this before. So far I'm not hating the consistency just by looking at it. Seems moist but not soggy. Got a little of the shrimp and the chicken and the andouille sausage and the pretend rice. I'm going to try to get a little bit of each in one bite. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Too much going on there. Here we go. Okay, flavor-wise, fantastic. Whether it's really true jambalaya or not, it's really tasty. The fake rice made with the chicken and the pork rinds are delicious. Probably going to have to play with it just to get the right consistency, but you know, hit and miss. I suppose the same is true with rice. But as far as getting all the flavors in there and the nostalgia of the jambalaya type recipe made carnivore. Yeah, that shrimp and andouille together is fantastic. So if you're jonesing for a jambalaya and you want to stick to carnivore, you could do worse. And if you want to make this keto, it's really very simple. Just take some diced tomatoes and add it to the chicken broth that you use to hold together that pretend rice. And of course, you always have the option of using celery, onions, and peppers in the mixture itself. A little bit of green onions on top really makes for a nice color pop with those tomatoes. And I would say brings the flavors a little bit closer to a traditional jambalaya. Well, that's it. It's not a quick and easy dish, but it's worth a try. I hope you give it a try and let me know how it turns out. And thanks again for watching. See you next time.